Regarding the housing programs, government programs, these are programs that are needed. This country finally understood that a way to tackle this deficit is by segmenting problems, not only segmenting the demand, but as well segmenting program through program segmentation. And a recommendation made by the government is that every program is important. No one program is more important than the other one. These semillero of propietarios, the owners, the seedbed of the owners is more important than my house now, mi casa ya, or that these adequate house is something that is less important. We need families to include housing to the formal urbanization of the cities or state today. That is most important, the competition, because Colombians will have a subsidy. We add up the subsidies of these welfare funds plus the government subsidies. No, this is not so. Everyone is important. Mi Casa show its advantages and how effective and efficient is this program. Houses are there in the hands of families, and the money was well spent. Other programs are excellent. We have in the program Conferencia something that 85% of subsidies in Colombia of these funds, welfare funds, are in Bogota. 90% of the priority housing is done in regions. So this is not matching. I am not here to criticize this, but this is just an open conversation that we have had with the government, that we have to make adjustments. Families start stating that if I was going to get 22 million, but they can give me today 50, I'd rather wait. And we are trying to push this in social housing sector. The topic of all these programs are needed, are required. We have to tell families from day one what is the expectation that they could have. Because you have to remember that if you are the ones that talks directly to the family, is the builder, if we don't have alignment between the family welfare fund or the government that doesn't want to give the money or the subsidies, but we need to have alignment of these programs. We need to have programs that are well aligned to give Colombia the possibility to move forward, understanding which are the problems, and each of these programs is tackling one specific problem, something that I value that has been done, and the minister presented this today. This continuity exists in programs. Funding is available, and I have to say these are subsidies to the demand so that families could have financial closure. If this program, My House, Mi Casa, does not exist, would not have been able to have the number of these subsidized housing that we have in the last years. When we get into the other area of this topic, we know that the main offer that is being made by the government, Compis, and this give a message of peace of mind to the families to have these subsidies until the 24th, the one that goes to an area where they sell real estate. The constructor is going to say, you can buy from me, I can give you in 24 months, and you get in 24 months this subsidy. This type of announcement is not moving these launching or pre-releases of these subsidized housing, because there was an uncertainty. But with this new announcement, our task as an association and the entrepreneurs as such, those that market these products, should give clarity to the families. If you buy today, you have the peace of mind. The commitment of President Duque at Camacol is until the 24th, because what we want is that we don't want to see what happened in the previous year, that when we change governments while decisions are being made, we have a push downwards of the economy, and we see the impact on this activity, and we don't want this to happen in the next change of government. Two main topics mentioned by the minister regarding, I think he talked about the payment of prejudices and claims in the case of a collapse of a building. He talked about safe housing. When he talked about insurance, this is a different view to the government's view. I'm not speaking about the policy or the additional policy or the safe housing order or legislation. As a country, we cannot just look at the topic of the risk of natural disasters as something that is not for us, is not something that belongs to the insurance industry. It's important that they have earthquake or landsliding insurance, but this is rather for a country where we would have to make the decision as a country to plan well the cities, to have adequate planning, and that these cities should not grow 50% informally. If you have an earthquake, some people apply the legislation, but others say no, because this country has developed in the cities informally. So the topic is not to have this process of policies, insurances in the case of natural risk or disaster, but the main reflection should be how do we reduce the risk, this threat, how we mitigate the threat. This is based on good planning in the city, safe planning in the city. As a country, we are part of this. You are part of this. We have to look at the cities in the mid and long term to have very serious planning of the land. We could have all the policies and market these policies, but if city continues developing informally in high-risk areas that cannot be mitigated in the areas where we could have landslide and flooding, not complying with the earthquake protection zone because it's done informally with a construction that is not complying with the standards and regulation, this is where we have higher risk of the country. Regarding registration of professionals, this is a discussion that we have had and we have promoted rather this type of discussion. Some of our colleagues of the association will talk about these topics related to excess regulation. We have said that finally, as private parties, we regulate and we adjust to the regulation. But the state at each level is not ready for this situation. When the space building fell down, there is a legislation. And then we are going to register those professionals that are certified. Our professionals were certified previously. This is a discussion that we have to have. And at the end, we just support each other because it's not that Colombia started being built and engineers started doing their task right after 2012. No, this is not so. What happened in Medellin, unfortunately, we have other 5, 6, 7 buildings that are going to be, that will fall down. We have a problem with decisions made by the authority, but what we have to state is that professionals are certified, are accredited, but the legislation set up certain conditions, and if you are accredited today, you can be not only the technical supervisor of the technical part of the construction, but rather for the whole process. Accreditation certification is for each professional, the one doing the soil studies, the design, the structural, technical supervisions, everyone has to be certified. And then one could have expected that this is a topic that has been solved immediately after the legislation was enacted. We had a schedule that was established as part of the National Commission for these earthquake resistance standards, and we are thinking today, or the question that I have stated is, what is the type of test NSR 10, which is the legislation, or the NSR 20 or 21, that is the next legislation or standard, and then this schedule is going to be changed because this standard for the earthquake resistance is going to change very dramatically. This topic is for everyone, and we have to see, because we want this standard to be applied, not only the accreditation. The registration is one thing, accreditation is something else, but we want this to be implemented. We are in a process where I think that could not be achieved in 2020, but in 2021 we are going to have a new standard for earthquake resistance, especially these professionals that are being accredited today. I go back to the figures, something that I saw on the presentation or a comment that was made regarding the inventory. These are just figures from the sector. We have a problem of inventories of finished inventory, and we have a problem of growth if we are not able to absorb this inventory that is not above 500 million pesos. August this year, the inventory was 10,000 units, UV TVs, and mainly in the middle segment. What do we call the middle segment? 112 to 360 million pesos. This is not a top type of income or segment. The subsidy to the rate for the non-fees had an impact. We have three main elements that produce this. First, the economy was adjusted, and those that had a greater impact in this order in the chronology. First, the top segment and then the intermediate segment were affected. In fact, this top segment goes down last month in a very large manner. It's still going down. It is not stabilized yet. And this intermediate segment or middle segment, we have weakness in employment. We have changes in the composition and makeup of families. But one element what was measured is that the elimination of the subsidy for the rate was eliminated this year. This was something that were committed 2 years ago. And we see that in January we have 20% increase in people that decided to not to buy the house and to go back. These rules were changed, and right now we have 6,000 units of housing that are finalized in that segment. Some companies could pay for these houses that are unsold, but other companies have difficulties, and these units have not been absorbed by the market. From May to June this happened, but July to August we see an increase on stocks on the inventory. These are my reflections. Dr. Botero, you have requested these comments on how we are seeing the housing policy. Now I move forward,
because we want to hear what Dr. Botero has to say. So let me move quickly. Where do we see the opportunities? I have 4 points I want to talk about housing and the insurance industry, and I'm going to repeat myself, or I might be repeating myself, but I like to do it because sometimes we lose sight of the importance of the insurance sector for the country and housing, because this sector does imply social and economic development. The building sector with high regulatory standards. The first one is the importance of construction for the country. The third is a sector of very big opportunities for the insurance industry. And four, to advance jointly in the comprehensive risk management. This is not the only risk that we have, the managing of the policy. But this is important for you if the idea is to add but not to restrict, but restrict production and access to housing, then we cannot be on the same side. Now, the importance, this in the last 2 decades, the sector doubled its share in the GDP. The weight of the sector in the national economy was 4.6. That is, we multiplied it by more than 3 between 2000 and 2016. And this is the volume at which we have grown. It's a good volume. It's not just how wonderful for builders. No, this is a good thing for the country. 201,000 if we look at it annually, but in total it's 2,100,000. The country decided to take a leap, and that's why we can talk, and we'll talk shortly about what's coming for the next decade. And this is, we're having an impact on the deficit. That's why it is so important to work hand in hand without restricting or putting a brake on things. Although we talk about housing or it is important for us to talk about other sectors, other destinations. And this is a young topic still. If we look at it as a region, we're well below what's produced in the region. But we have taken a very big leap, 4.6 million square meters of non-residential projects between the decade of 98 and 2000 and what we're doing now. And these are segments that for economic growth and the generation of jobs is very important. In big figures, we have multiplied by 8 in the last 30 years home buildings. Every hour, construction of a new house, a new home starts. I've already mentioned it, 4.6 million square meters more in non-residential projects with respect to the last decade. Now, there's 8 housing projects for 100,000 inhabitants. And we're talking about a production of 73.2 billion Colombian pesos annually from the construction sector. Now, when I made this comment in that, well, we started building wells since 2012 or 2013, no, this is a sector that has been being built with high regulatory standards. Everything is regulated from prior to construction, and I'm not going to read everything that's listed there, but from before construction, the construction process, after delivery of the construction, and it has all the mechanisms for sanctioning and for penalties. These sub-secretariats that control for housing control, etc. It's regulated. It is regulated and monitored. Of course, that what happened, and was a very big warning, is what happened there. Now, there was a problem. I'm not going to go into that discussion about ethics and etc. But there were some cracks that you could say if the law is going to be useful to quote unquote seal those cracks, to fill up those spaces in the regulation. If things can go through there, filter through there, let's close these. And in this draft act, we said let's prevent things falling through these gaps. And look at what happened with the Quiroses brothers. But these casualties that have happened, there won't be casualties because of a policy. There will be casualties because there's no good architecture, no good engineering that have to be done. So we said, let's focus on the law, helping increase or enhance monitoring and supervision. This law is also going to be adjusted, but it is well known in the region because of its high standards. So you have to apply it well. If this building we're talking about had been built following the construction process, had it been designed well, and the construction process we would have avoided this catastrophe. So, and perhaps regulation will continue existing, of course. Look at this is separate from what I've been telling you, all the technical regulations, but there's more. It's just I didn't bring them all because otherwise I wouldn't finish. But there's 400 approximately technical rules, 26 technical rules, and I say this, formal builders who do their homework well do not need any new mechanism or policy or new technicians to come and tell them how to do their job because they're already doing this. What's listed here. It is important to take this into account. And well, the entire accountability regime, the civil code, etc., you are all familiar with this. You have probably studied this sector well. And looking at those volumes, the relation between the insurance and the building sector is not new. The discussion has started taking place shortly, but there's so many products we have that have helped the sector to manage its risks. And this is what we should continue doing moving forward. That is not put a brake on this boost in the growth, but to see how we can embark in these new regulations, but understanding the business from the technical standpoint, legal standpoint, and business standpoint, and country standpoint. This slide, just to tell you that what we have seen for the coming decade, and here is where this is your business as well. In Colombia, the population will increase by 7.4 million inhabitants. Household size will be 2.5 people. There will be much pressure on the demand. It is 19% smaller than what we're presently seeing. 82% of the population in the country will be urban population. There will be a quantitative and qualitative 15% deficit in housing, and 4 out of 10 households pay rent. So the pressure for demand will be huge. It's 24 billion annually, Colombian pesos annually, in leases or rent. So what does this mean? That we have to build them. This is not a forecast. They will be built. What we want is for them to be formal, 3.2 million homes in the next decade. And we're a year away from it starting. We are in 2019. 64 million square meters of non-residential buildings in the next decade. Our challenge, and I say that this is a challenge that we should all be involved in, because with the pace we're carrying, despite the gap we had in the last 2 years, we can say that in 2030, Colombia could talk about zero deficit. What's going to be our challenge? That now it's starting to become a problem, because we still have a deficit, but we have a middle segment, a mid-class that's starting to weaken, and we need to be very careful here. I'm talking from a housing standpoint. So we need to do the process now, zero deficit, and that middle class, that step taken to become middle class, help strengthen it. How? With formal and dignified housing. And 24, well, I already talked about a 0% deficit. And here to conclude, so as to give Dr. Botero the floor, is this. What we see, the relation has been forever. We've had a relation. The possibility for growth of your industry vis-a-vis the sector I represent has always existed. You have always been there with other products that you know better than me. The idea would be that we continue adding to this, that we continue adding with these new regulations. I am not going to go back as to whether I was in agreement or not with the 10-year policy, but now that it's on the table, now that the regulation is there, now that the superintendent is here as well, because he's doing what's missing in this regulation, there's things you cannot lose sight of, which are the last 4 things I want to say. One, we are in a sector, what I represent, the building, is not a concentrated sector. This is a sector where 50% are small and medium-sized enterprises or SMEs. And here you have to be very careful, because it's not that the 5, 15, or 20 or 25 largest ones to have access to a policy or an access to any of these regulations. And we start skimming, not by quality, but by size. And we cannot go into that. That cannot happen. The models of operation and specialization. Our companies have become more specialized. There's some who do everything. They develop, they promote, they build, they market. Others have started creating like their peers in order to have that support. And what we cannot see happen is that we start classifying as lack of experience something that doesn't look like now, but they've had in their history. I say this because of certain products that I know where one starts looking at what the company has done. And one has to be very careful here. Not all are equal, and it's a very dispersed business network. The particular characteristic of urban and real estate development at a regional level, the scale we would like, and this I learned when I came into this, because I used to be a public official, and I always imagined we're going to enable or prepare 8,000 hectares, do macro projects, but no. In Neiva, 3,000 homes becomes an important project for the region. So you have to be careful with scale. What's the criteria to determine whether these are large-scale projects or not being built? Another, the type of projects, a similar situation. Number 3, the regions. 6 out of every 10 subsidized housing is done in the regions, in middle, intermediate-sized cities and surrounding municipalities. And that relation or that ratio is going to continue growing because it's no longer a matter of 5 cities, and we're already building housing in this country. That change of scale has happened in 110 municipalities. So think of this: who builds in one of these municipalities will not necessarily be the very large company that can have. It's a company that can be doing things well and needs to be looked at with that glass or through that glass in order to be awarded. And independently of their size, and here I go into risk management and sources, know how to do their homework. Very big discussion with the OCTs, but I think that ultimately it stayed there implicitly included. But there's no need to teach the companies how to purchase the land or up to where we're going to determine up to where to intervene to see whether the award is made or not. In this case, I'm talking about the policy, but I shouldn't talk solely about the policy. But there's 4 mechanisms, but you know that ultimately we're in the hands of the policy. It is very important, and I want to tell you, and this is my final remark, that in 2016 we conducted a risk study with McKinsey. We measured or we mapped 40 risks of the sector, and it surprised me. I was surprised because we thought we'd also see things about financing and other issues. No, the 5 largest risks, we published the top because that's what we continue discussing with the government, national government and regional governments. The 5 top risks have to do with urbanization. They have to do with urbanization, construction, commercialization versus rent, and we had to start managing these risks because now that between launching a project and delivering it, there's no longer 24 months but 30 or more months in many cases. This has to do with these issues in urbanization, but on the account of the size of the state, to understand that the scale has changed. When you see this, then these risks in urbanism make the relation with suppliers, with the industrialists, with the banks, and with you, who are part of the chain and become suppliers of the sector, have to look at the problem differently. It was not simply that risk that the building failed. There's other things to look at in the market. The same happens in construction, commercialization, and rent. And something really caught my attention in the latest discussions we've had with the government, and I was telling you earlier, where the inventory is concentrated, it's in the middle segment. What were we able to build and was accepted by the government? A proposal and a guarantee by the National Guarantees Fund to change the financing percentage. We've been unable to get this decree issued. I think it's not going to happen yet. There's still concerns. But for the leasing, it is working, because for leasing, it can go to 100%. And I was saying, how good would it be that part of what you offered, I think it exists, somebody was telling me it already existed, is to come in with guarantee products for long term, for credits. This is very interesting. It's 19 billion Colombian pesos annually. And for the banks, I was at a board meeting today, and the banks were saying, how much are you using the guarantee? And it's that there's still not trust on this. But when the proposal comes from the sector itself, thinking about guarantees like these, there will surely be full, complete trust, and it will be a product that will be used. So this was what I wanted to share with you. I think we're at a point where you are part of the chain where the country has changed. The production scale of housing has changed. Don't forget that we have a very varied product. This should be more not by size but by quality, and I trust fully in quality. We're in all the regions. There's other business opportunities and risk management. Let's accompany us in the way how to manage risk, and let's look where other opportunities can be found, because this issue is not just this, which is what made us sit down and have such a good discussion earlier, but let's do this so we can work together for a long time. Thank you very much, Mr. Botero. thank you very much to you, Sandra, for your presence here. In the years that we have been interacting, I insist in calling her Sandra, and she insists in calling me Dr. Botero. And I wonder if it's a way of underscoring how young she is, or how much less young, or not so much young I am, because this is a sort of an explanation for that respectful tone, unjustified, that Sandra refers to me. And she will promise that she will never again call me Dr. Botero in front of all my affiliates. I am going to begin with your 4 initial reflections, and then I want to talk a bit about this 10-year insurance, or decenal, seguro decenal, which is what brings us together under present circumstances. And indeed, the importance of the construction sector for the country is very evident. The minister has shown us the dramatic increase that the construction sector has in the generation of GDP. This, of course, is one of the most dynamic sectors of Colombia's economy in the last 10 years at least. And yes, it is affected by a cycle, but we've always known in the construction sector, and the activity is subject to cycles, undergoes cycles, for reasons that could be mitigated but not avoided. So for us, that these recent years, or the year that just passed, has not been the most brilliant year for the construction sector doesn't mean anything. Perspectives are important, valuable, and as the Minister of Housing said brilliantly this morning, well, there are symptoms and signals very evident of recovery. And the importance of the sector is not measured exclusively by its share in GDP, but also on the large impact it has in the productive chains moving forward and looking back, and the large importance it has in the generation of jobs. That is very clear to us, and that's one of the criteria that guide the industry in its relations with the construction sector. It is true, as you have said, that the sector has high regulatory standards that certain builders adhere to strictly, others less, and there's some where we see issues, and that is a task where the association, I know it well, just like the government, and we're determined in resolving this. So here, on this, we also feel, how do I say, understanding and solidarity with what the sector has been doing. And yes, in a country with the housing deficits that Colombia has, well, the demand for housing will continue growing, while this demand transforms because of demographic and cultural reasons. So it is a gigantic challenge for all those who interact in this world, included ourselves. Evidently, demand is changing, and in part the difficulties with certain inventories could be the result of an early transformation of the demand that remained, or that has changed much faster than the supply in a certain relatively smaller sector. And at the end, you state, or you talk about the importance of advancing together in comprehensive risk management. That is music to our ears. The insurance industry, its essence is to contribute to mitigating risks and to absorbing risks that are transferred to it through the insurance contracts. And in this context, we're partners. If you deliver good quality projects to us because you've managed risks well, the sector will reciprocally easily obtain coverage at reasonable prices. So it's different roles, but the institutional objective is the same that we share: adequate risk management in the different scopes in which these risks appear. And in the last place, I will say that whereas I'm going to refer to this 10-year construction insurance, we have a long history of ties or relations with the construction industry, covering different types of risks, included in this recent stage of the national government, leases within these very interesting programs that seek to make homeowners, certain people with very low incomes, and to make them eligible. A mechanism has been designed for there to be scheduled savings that we guarantee so that they can access home ownership, that, as you said, is the most important business that families make in their lifetime. And this brings us to the 10-year construction insurance, or decenal. I'm going to give you, or I have one slide with the matters that we have discussed with Sandra throughout this complex period that began with the presentation of the law and which is still not concluded. It still hasn't concluded, even though the progress that was recorded today in the presentations of the minister and the finance superintendent place this in the horizon that indeed the obligation of having this insurance, valid insurance, will be enacted in February 2021. And just to recall, the minister has commitments with certain dates, or dates that are a certainty with respect to the presentation of the tests by the technical supervisors of the works, and very clear commitments prior to the coming into force of the mandatory insurance of the registry of these technical supervisors. In turn, and I remember because perhaps you could not hear this, the superintendent has announced a new mechanism that's very interesting for speeding the activity of the insurance agency in the automatic approval or authorization of new areas or branches, provided certain requirements are met. What before required prior authorization, from now on will not require so. Generosity, freedoms that are given to the industry, but also, like the superintendent said, commitments and responsibilities placed upon the industry. Greater trust by the supervisor, greater degrees of responsibility by the industry, for the industry. These are virtuous mechanisms that we happily receive and accept. And lastly, the superintendent also pointed out that the strictly voluntary regime, the companies can, under this generic authorization, start offering insurance coverage, this 10-year construction insurance, even if they're not mandatory until October 22nd, 2022. 2021, correction of the speaker. Throughout this process, long and complex, the construction industry has conveyed to us a set of concerns. I want to touch on them, not because I believe, Sandra, that you still have in this concerns that have been unresolved. I think that to a large extent we have advanced in establishing an agreement as to what is desirable and that we want to work on together. So what I'm going to mention now is not saying it to you. It's Bolivar for Santander to understand, but just to tell it to those who you represent. And I am going to talk about policy costs first, which is a concern of the construction industry. We have run simulations of these costs. We have done this based on information timely provided to us by Camacol. It is our belief that the impacts are marginal. If one understands the premium as something more than a stamp, but a promise of value by the insurance industry of absorbing certain incidents or events should they occur. I am not going to quote figures. Our belief is that these are marginal impacts. And this has to do with the second point, the existence of a supply, of insurance supply. And here again, I'm talking for sectors of the industry, not for its CEO. One has to remember that the capacity of the insurance industry in this country, like in any other, is a result or based to the equation insurers, reinsurers. This pool has sufficient capacity to absorb these new coverages proposed by the housing sector, as has been shown in other cases as well, or proven as well. And perhaps in this case, I should refer to the importance, the recognition by one of our member companies of a gigantic incident in the infrastructure sector that recently happened or occurred. There's a reinsurance industry that recognizes these coverages because it handles them in other countries like we saw today, into an insurance industry that provides the first coverage on this, which is very broad, as can be verified by the meetings that we periodically hold in the process of deepening the knowledge that the industry has of its new client, of the new product, which is a traditional client, which now demands, which is the construction sector. Sandra has had, and this is a concern we share, and she mentioned it, the risk of segmentation, not between good and bad builders, but large and small builders. It would be terrible for this to happen. We are partners of the construction industry in mitigating risks and in reducing risks to the extent possible, and this is what means for the residual risk not to be transferred and that we accept it. So it's not a matter of trying with different criteria the building companies because of their size, but trying them differently to reward, as should be, those who meet adequate quality patterns. And we certainly recognize, the industry does it, and I do it on behalf of it, that the quality of the works they're delivering to the market improves every day. The country is increasingly more formal. Its construction sector undoubtedly is, and therefore, despite one sees the occurrence of bad practices, cases of bad practices, since they're so large and painful, convey the image that the construction industry has standards that are subpar. And it is not so. We understand that there is a thrusting industry here that's growing, that's professional, that does its work in managing risks as it should. That's part of it being a good businessman, and that's part of your responsibility, of its social responsibility. And this determines, or in turn, this regulation says that the companies have to define their decision to provide coverage based on objective grounds. It's a mandatory insurance. It's mandatory insurance for whoever's obliged to take it, but not for whoever is to supply it. So the government, the national government, then warns very seriously the insurance agency, you have to take or make objective decisions. This means that if a builder is denied coverage, he has the right to ask why he's being denied it. And here we're going to be your partners, like in many other topics as well. And this, of course, makes it essential because of elementary ethics of whoever provides a public service, as that, which is that of insurance, that one cannot demand requirements or outside of the rule or outside of the standard or compensations. Hence, the insurer can request other things from the builder or the constructor, but if it only requires the 10-year construction insurance, it has the moral and ethical obligation to resolve the issue. And lastly, there's a matter where we need to work together for it to work well, and it is the interaction amongst the insurance companies and the technical supervisors. Let's say that there's two extremes there. The insurer will not be an efficient, responsible insurer if he says that he passed the technical supervision, if it passed the automatic supervision, the technical supervision with flying colors. He'll insure something. But on the contrary, an insurer that says, I don't care what the technical supervisor says, and I conduct all the studies from zero, from scratch, will probably run out of clients. So what we need to look for is in virtuous interaction, the generation of bonds of trust between those people who fulfill a public duty and upon whose criteria, in good part, the insurance companies are going to make a decision. And I will finish by saying that we are very respectful of that industry. We want to serve it well. And like you have said, and you know that's my desire, we want to work hand in hand with Camacol in moving throughout the entire country to facilitate the construction industry, especially the smallest companies, as you have highlighted, the process that they should follow, the culture they should assume to access insurance. Because evidently, large builders, those who are involved in financial groups will obviously have no difficulties. So you are defending, and that is what I would do if I were in your position. You are defending the space of the small and mid-sized companies, the intermediate and small cities. All of this being aware of the business network of the sector, as you mentioned at the end of your message. So I feel very happy, and I thank the members of the association as well for us having had this very high degree of understanding. Sandra.
Thank you very much. We have to move forward. We have here the superintendent. He is really acquainted with these concerns. And we need that we will be moving forward. We have some pending meetings. We have been a little bit busy in the technical parts with Fasecolda and Camacol. I have three main concerns, which is the fact that we have established a deadline, but this is not so clear. What is the period when the builders would have to start requesting this type of license? Because they don't have the license, then they don't have a policy, and this could be a problem. And as well, another problem will be this preliminary period. I think that this is not well drafted, and we could have a problem with the situation. We have a pending meeting to solve and to clear out these doubts on the period, the deadline, and the adjustments. This is a reality, but there is a transition period. I don't know if the builders, if you talk with those from Pastor or the city, they don't know exactly when they would have to request these certificates to comply or the license to comply with the date of the 21. And this is something that happens with all regulations, and we tell the government, and you may deny this to the builder because a project that is ready to start, and you could deny the policy if they don't comply with this. What I have understood, I'm not fully acquainted with this information, but we are going to have this refusal, and they did it not with the existing companies, but with a larger. They said, no, we are not going to grant this license because in a project that is called Ciudad Verde in Soacha, second phase of the Green City, Ciudad Verde in Soacha, why they have a serious soil study. It's an area that could be flooded, and several buildings have been built already. So I don't know if I'm going to say something that you may laugh at. It's not a second instance, but at least to have an explanation of what happened, why this certificate has not been issued. The superintendent cannot say something is being refused that I legitimately think I could have. So this is a topic of self-regulation. We have to have a peace of mind on this topic as well. The aspect of cost, finally, as Dr. Botero said, this means to protect both the buyer and the construction company. And I was yesterday in Chile in the meeting of the Federation of Chambers of Construction. And in Latin America, we realized that there is no access to housing because housing is quite expensive. And the construction companies are getting more money. So I thought it was only in the case of Colombia, but I see that everywhere is the same situation. So we are going to have more difficult access to housing because of this additional cost. So the idea is not to stop accessibility, not to weaken the demand, neither the supply. This is the main topic. And I think that you have advanced on this exercise because this could be an immediate type of situation. We could have too much offer in the market and quality, but this is excellent because we need quality on both sides. If we have technical supervision, then automatically you do accept this, or to have a parallel type of supervision because the cost could increase. I thank you for this time. And I am going to start calling you Jorge Humberto and not Doctor anymore. I thank you. Camacol as well, you have, we have some affiliates from Camacol here because we have this chain and the construction is doing joint efforts. You do it in one side or the other, things do not have good results. Thank you very much. Thank you.